I had a little bit of time, so I thought I would actually sit down for a moment and perhaps record a bit of the introduction to my book, D&D and American Institution, which I've been trying to promote for a while now. Last month we had the PDF come out. I was able to then fulfill the Kickstarter, and now I get to do the best part, which is in fact promoting it. And in so doing, I thought I would read to you guys the introduction, and maybe that could draw some interest. Because when I say D&D is something particularly American, it has a rather specific meaning. So let me go through this introduction, and then I'll kind of constitute the video, and we'll just go from there, okay? The story of Dungeons and Dragons is one of war, adventure, experimentation, entrepreneurship, hubris, and the American dream. Its origin derives from wargaming, particularly the style pioneered in the 1824 Prussian game Kriegspiel, which was directly used for training officers so they could get vicarious experience of battle. It required at least two players and a referee to judge the game. It eventually incorporated more freewheeling elements to encourage creativity. Through a succession of games ranging from Strategos to Gettysburg, D&D would be born of this tradition in 1974. Despite being fantasy, it pitched itself as a war game, and uniquely one of pure imagination, which has now endured for 50 years. I have many purposes in writing this book. First, to demonstrate in print, just as I have online, that John Peterson misinterpreted and misused sources in his Playing at the World's second edition for the purpose of tarnishing the reputations of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Second, since I have not yet found a book that follows the normal academic form of a history, it is natural that I should then follow those standards, using Chicago Manual. The reader will find a complete bibliography and all the endnotes in this book, also unlike Peterson. I also have the goal of synthesizing more specialized books in order to tie together the threads in this field, and will note the difficulty in obtaining many sources, which get used and abused when writers take on this subject. Unfortunately, time did not permit an index. There is also an ethical issue here, which is concerned with how we go about writing history. Many unserious people try to criticize the past by ignoring the context of the time period, when context is the bedrock of the entire historical profession. While one can easily take shots in an ethics class being unbounded by the time period, it is much harder to do so with a thorough understanding of what was happening and when and why. To make an epistemic point, historical knowledge is the result of cognitive contact with the past, which arises out of successive acts of intellectual virtue. Its motivation is driven by the pursuit of truth about the past, bounded by the time period, and concerns itself with problems arising from conflicting accounts. As such, there will be some times when a source has to be considered doubtful, a statement too vague, or even someone's claim to be motivated by something other than capital T truth. There are two books which have most affected how I have approached this one: Jacques Barzon's From Dawn to Decadence, and the late Gordon Wood's The American Revolution. At opposite ends of the length spectrum, both offer keen insights and use their space to the best advantage. On a related note, I will also be killing the sacred historical cows of avoiding the use of the first person as well as the passive voice, and I hope you will allow the conceit. These are my thoughts, and I will express them as such as I sally forth and rally my arguments. Gygax was ambushed by Williams, after all. It is due to the game's endurance that I have dubbed it an American institution, for it has almost become a compulsion to be excited at whatever new edition of the game is coming up, and that tends to happen every few years. If there are some essentially American components to the game, they can be found in the gameplay through the accumulation of wealth by risk, which is also found in the character of Gary Gygax himself. When the right game, at the right time, came into his line of sight, he clacked furiously at the typewriter to get the game printed. Along the way, he created the largest gaming convention, Gen Con, which also speaks to his organizational ability. Then, his meteoric success and downfall are also particularly American. The lawsuits surrounding Dave Arneson's royalties are also rather American, whatever one thinks of them. The theme of experimentation comes from both the co-authors of the original game, and in particular the frenzied mind of Dave Arneson, who came up with the idea for the game while reading Conan the Cimmerian and watching horror films. By combining a small-scale war game with the labyrinth of a dungeon inspired by the glorious American pulp fiction of the 30s, he created a new type of game. His participation in the Castle and Crusade Society which attempted to conduct large-scale games of diplomacy and war, led to his showing Gary Gygax the Blackmore game in 1972, or maybe later, which then set Gygax's imagination aflame. While their relationship would sour over business, luckily they were civil after all the dust settled, and even Gygax was kicked out of the company he had started in 1985. While editions would follow upon editions after that time, none of the authors seems to have the pull that either of the founder of the hobby had, which may explain why the current owners of the property have worked so hard to sully the reputations of the two men above. The stale charges of racism and sexism have been leveled at them, even in a book designed to give the reader a look at many of the original documents. So irresistible is this compulsion that they had to write pages of such a contemptible pablum. These charges have to be met head on, and such is one of the purposes of this book. Now, it is broadly set up into a few sections. First, the lead up to the original game, which requires some actual military history and the path of wargaming. Second, the creation of that game, its gameplay, the popular reaction to it, as well as Gary Gygax's revision and his eventual downfall. Third, the game after Lorraine Williams took control and Zeb Cook of Unimpeachable Talent, second edition of Gygax's AD&D. Fourth, the subsequent editions of the games, their backgrounds, successes, failures, and how things stand at present. This book's significance comes from two things: detailing the hobby's wargame origins and synthesizing most of the field. Another goal is to make this book something Americans as well as Romans would appreciate: a usable history, one which functions as a guide to future conduct. By reading this, one should walk away with an understanding of all the subjects covered within and be able to engage and talk cogently about them. The arguments advanced are meant to defend both Gygax and Arneson, who had set about to make games simulating a certain time period, and by simulating it, included elements which make the modern player turn a sickly green pallor. In doing so, a fair amount of detail concerning the United States across the decades will be used to give some background details of the time, like feminists aiming at Gygax when he was trying to get D&D off the ground in 1974. To keep this aim, the book has focused on concision and cutting to the chase over excessive detail. With this, I find myself in opposition to John Peterson, Ben Riggs, Wizards of the Coast, and that segment of the hobby only interested in using Gygax and Arneson as punching bags. It's incredibly silly to blame wargamers for representing the past in their games, let alone blaming them for having races, which don't exist, while modern gamers have taken to using species, a worse term. You will regularly find my arguments against their positions, which will sometimes be simple, sometimes presented in formal logic. The goal is, of course, clarity while also being correct. Along with this, it will be shown that original Dungeons & Dragons is a complete game. By complete, in this context, I mean a fantasy adventure game which scales from the particular hero character to the grand battles between nations, in which players switch focus at these scales of play throughout the game. Some sessions, it is a regular dungeon exploration. In another, as one assumes the mantle of a baron or a duke with regional troubles, or even contracting adventurers still controlled by other players. Still another, when in the role of an emperor or a king, with banners and standards fluttering in the wind, they march in column to the battlefield to determine the fates of nations. This is an experience not to be trifled at, even if the games of today do not take the scale in this fashion. With that, Gary Gygax and Jeff Parent's chainmail will get the treatment it deserves, since its dismissal has led to decades of misunderstanding the original game. Indeed, recent revelations have come to light to demonstrate just how much Gygax integrated chainmail into advanced Dungeons & Dragons. By 1975, he had the rights to the game, and so did not need to send gamers to Guide on Games to get a copy. And this integration has proved so thorough, it speaks in particular to Gygax's attitude when writing AD&D. From just about the moment D&D started, to get some real traction, he had to fight a misunderstanding gaming press which dismissed the wargaming elements in chainmail entirely. Well, he would show them by putting those darn rules into AD&D. The split of the basic and advanced lines will demand some words themselves, since many gamers think that the major reason the latter was developed involved denying Arneson royalties. The lawsuit he launched in 1979 and the subsequent settlement will be looked at as well. Still, the so-called easier game stayed much closer to the original experience than Gygax's, and its culmination with Frank's Mincer would prove a classic that has the staying power for so long that his version is still talked about fondly. Indeed, the basic line would ultimately outlast AD&D 1E. Gygax's divorce also deserves some consideration, though only insofar as it affected him and his efforts in Hollywood. History is naturally voyeuristic, but some things should stay between man and wife. From this, the legendary D&D Cocaine Mansion came about, along with a cartoon which is still enjoyed to this day. Flint Dille, who helped write just about every beloved cartoon of the 80s, will be a primary witness to both this Hollywood phase and with what ultimately happened with his sister, Lorraine Williams, when she took over TSR from Gygax. The reign of Lorraine will be given a fair shot, since many of the settings players enjoy in D&D came from her new direction for the company. Wizards of the Coast Magic the Gathering will get some mention, though mainly about how it printed a mountain of cash to purchase TSR with. Once TSR was bought by them in 1997, a pattern emerged which makes only sense in the light of Whit Whitman's explanation of the massive survey done under Williams. It was learned that players typically only stick around for 7 years, then stop playing. Thus, almost as soon as the new edition gets on its feet, its successor needs to be thought about, while the current edition's product line gets bloated to maintain its market position. The 5th edition lasting for a decade was a fluke when compared to the half editions found within the 3rd and 4th versions of the game. The efforts of enthusiasts to publish rules in order to play older style D&D will also be considered. The meteoric rise and eventual fall of 5th edition will deserve quite some detail, since what started off as a return to an older type of game became something entirely different. The reasons for this, largely due to online outrage, eventually morphed the product line from designing for a game to designing for a loud crowd, often with political messaging. This actually started the author's AD&D collection due to the outrage over Oriental Adventures. This will build up into a sequence of events which will demonstrate why the newest edition, so star for an identity that has been dubbed D&D 2024, has not done well as a game. There are many competing wills involved, different goals, egos, and varied levels of success that, despite this being about a game, it certainly has all the makings of regular history, which is where we must begin on the sulphurous, choked battlefields of the 18th century to get a better idea of how war was conducted, which fed into the 18th century's method of war.